Hey everyone! So I finally decided to show you the full process of how I paint a guitar. This is the guitar, and here is its neck. And we'll start with the neck first. Actually, the most important thing to begin with is to prepare everything for painting. That is, the first thing you need to do is seal the pores with epoxy. Let's start by working on the neck. Now I'll show you which epoxy I'm going to use and the proper way to mix it. So why this particular epoxy? Zapp's Epoxy 540. You need to use either 540 or 541. There are also the numbers 539 and 538, but it's probably better not to use those. I bought them once before, and they really weren't that great. This one here is a 2-component variety, which is mixed 1-to-1 by weight. And now let's get started. So I've turned on the scale. First we're going to take the epoxy resin itself. And let's go ahead and add 8 grams right here. Actually, you don't really need that much. Oh, it's 7 after all is said and done. But when there is far too little of the mixture, it becomes quite hard to mix. So we take a long wooden skewer, and then we can start mixing it all together very thoroughly and very well. Basically, once I finish mixing, I'll put on gloves. I'll show you the next step. Alright, I've mixed it well. It's ready to use. By the way, why do I use this particular epoxy? Because it sets very quickly. You don't have to wait a whole day. I mean, in about 4 hours you can sand it, or apply another layer, but I won't be sanding it. That's it. And honestly, its flow is just absolutely perfectly right. It's not too runny, so it doesn't seep all the way through the top most likely, and it's not too thick either. Otherwise, it would be quite difficult to spread it out evenly. Now, we are going to apply just a small amount of it right here, with a very specific and distinctive kind of. Use a flexible rubber spatula. Now it doesn't continue to spread over the uneven surface area of the part anymore. Right now, my main focus is simply to fill in all of these tiny pores to get the surface ready for the next step. And that is pretty much all there is to it for now. And now we carefully remove all of the excess. The most important thing is to avoid sharp drips like this, but you just can't see them. Let's try to show it. Just like these examples. Because that would be a bump, so I just rub it all out with the palm of my hand. Well now, and that is pretty much all there is to it really. And now at this point in the process we have successfully finished the construction of our primary main surface. And right away I am going to start working on this project using nothing but my own 2 hands to get it done. The color right away begins to show. Actually, as you can clearly see right here, it is beginning to turn a yellow color. So you should keep that point in mind. If you are working with a specific material like white maple and you want the final color to be a perfectly clean and pure white, then you really need to take this crucial factor into account. I applied it here with a bit of extra just in case. Now I really need to carefully even all of this out so that the surface is perfectly uniform and smooth once again, making sure that there are no bumps or ridges left. At this point, I just take the material and slowly spread it around exactly where I need it to go by using the palms of my hands. You also constantly need to keep in mind that these areas here are basically end grain. They always tend to absorb a significant amount of liquid, so you will need to apply it very thoroughly in this area. And make sure that you do not overlook any details, otherwise there will be a color difference later on. Now, exactly as we did before, I'm going to use the palm of my hand and then I wipe away the excess product and rub it in well. Furthermore, and moving beyond that specific point, wipe it all off with a clean napkin. Well, it seems we have reached the end of our presentation and there is nothing more to discuss today. Right now, at this very specific moment in time. Now, I need to head over to the workshop and coat the guitar body itself. So we've moved into the paint room, but not because the epoxy has a strong smell or anything like that. It is just more convenient here to coat the soundboard and the sides at the same time. This way you can easily rotate them as you work. I brought the scales and the hardener. I decided to take 2 separate cups so that I can mix the batches individually for the soundboard and for the sides. This is because it might easily happen that while I am busy coating the soundboard, by the time I actually start coating the sides, the mixture will have already thickened up quite a bit. If that happens, you will definitely mess the whole thing up. Anyway, I'm going to mix it now, set it up, and show you. Mixed it. Oh, the heater is going to make some noise now. I am really sorry about that, everyone. Right now, at this very moment, begin. Mr. is currently busy recording a brand new video. And that is all there is to it for this part. So I can keep working. As for the kerfing too, I usually just prefer to do all of that work by hand, but the final results are honestly not that great when you look closely. Standard paper towels often leave far too much messy lint behind whenever you try to use them. It's already starting to thicken, but I will make it there in time. Right at that particular point in time, when Since the mixture has already thickened quite significantly and become much more viscous, you will find that it is now considerably harder to spread it out evenly across the entire surface as you originally intended. It might look really streaky and quite uneven to you right now, but don't worry about the initial appearance. But when the second layer goes on, it'll look much better. That is exactly how the process should look for now. We will regroup and meet back here once this coat has fully dried, and it is finally time to apply the second layer of the finish. It took me 12 minutes to do this. So so the next day has come. The sun is shining. It's freezing. I've already gone over it with a Scotch-Brite pad. I degreased it. It's clean now, so it won't get dusty. And now I'm mixing a new batch and applying the second layer. Let's go. Alright, that's it. There's a little bit of dust, but it's no big deal. Let Brighton take care of it. Now I am going to carefully apply the second layer to the entire neck area in the same way, though I won't be showing that particular step on camera anymore. It's all the same process. Next up, we will be meeting again just as I begin the priming phase of this project. So now that we have officially finished all of the painting work for this stage, we are going to move right along and start the priming process to get everything ready for the next step. I've already degreased everything, mixed the lacquer, well, not lacquer, primer. Now I am thoroughly wiping the surface down with a tack cloth. And this is the neck. You will not actually be able to see how I'm painting the neck because it's not very convenient to film here. Let's go. If there are some dust particles on the primer, it's not as bad as on the lacquer. But still, I'd rather not have them. But unfortunately, there are some here. The second coat. I'm going to head back now so I can start mixing up another fresh batch of the ingredients so that we have plenty more ready to go. Now we wait until tomorrow. We sand it, check it out. If everything's okay, then it's time for the family. Honestly, I don't even know if anything was audible or not. Oh well. The next day has come. Now we can sand it. So as you can see, the pores are filled. And by the way, you can see the difference. Here I coated this with epoxy in 2 layers. And right here, you can clearly see the tiny pores just a little bit. But don't worry, they will be completely sanded out later, so they won't be there at all in the end. And over here you can see that I have carefully sanded off the excess epoxy because there were these specific spots where the epoxy was sticking out quite a bit. It all floated up to the surface, and now you can really see the major difference. So this is exactly what it looks like without filling the pores, roughly speaking. And this is what it looks like with the pores fully filled. The same thing goes for the whole neck area and for everything else on the piece. So you can see the difference and why we're doing this. And besides that, epoxy resin is used not only to apply a smaller amount of primer, but also specifically so that during regular use, the primer and the lacquer layers don't gradually sink into the material over time. In other words, the epoxy effectively prevents this sinking from happening. Now, I have this particular kind of specialized sanding sponge right here with me. It's cut and it's pretty dense. 320 grit sandpaper. I'll cut a new piece now. We take it like this. And then we sand the surface thoroughly. Right now, I am actually filming this with one hand while sanding with the other simultaneously. I find that it actually makes things very convenient. Now, I will go ahead and sand this piece down completely to show you exactly how far you need to take it. Actually, this isn't a lesson. This is just how I personally do it. Now I'll carefully sand down this specific spot and show you exactly what it should look like. So, I've sanded it. We can see that now there are no more sink marks. But if you look here from a certain angle, you can still see a couple of spots. They kind of shine a bit, which means that the surface here, well, somewhere around here, is still uneven. You can't really see them, but these are the sanding marks left by the sandpaper. It's not a big deal. The varnish will cover and even everything out. Here, I sanded a little by hand, but mostly I use this sanding block. It's like that even though it's a bit too hard so that the surface stays even. There you go. Now, I'm going to start sanding down this area by hand. I'm also sanding these spots with this block to ensure that everything is perfectly smooth in this section. And it's the same here. Now I'm going to sand here. I'll pause and show you how some spots are shining, but there's still something else that needs to be done here. I'll show you right now. Here you can clearly see, look, there's a very big spot, a deep dent. And in some specific places here, you can still see these various dents. And it's quite clear that I won't have enough primer, so when I start to sand it down, these won't simply go away. That's why I need to avoid applying primer again. Here's another deep one like that, but it won't go away. There you go. So to avoid the need to apply another coat of primer and to sand down the entire surface all at the same time, we will carefully pour a small amount of cyanoacrylate on it now, and everything should work out perfectly fine for us. Right here I have some cyanoacrylate glue, which is basically super glue. And now I am going to take it and carefully drip it right onto the surface here, covering anything that seems suspicious to me, including any imperfections that I think simply won't sand out. I just pour it on like this. The main thing to remember is not to apply an excessive amount of glue, because the glue is much harder than the base primer. And when we begin to sand the surface down, alright, let's go ahead and get started with it. While you are sanding it, you could easily end up accidentally removing far too much of the primer. Now I'll go over it again, glue up a bit more, and then I'll show you how it looks. There, I've poured glue over everything. Of course, some spots didn't really need to be filled, but just to be safe, I did it anyway. Now I'm going to let it sit here for a few moments to harden thoroughly, and then after that I'll carefully spray it with the activator. And when I go to spray it, I always make sure to do it exactly like this. From a good distance, applying just a little bit at a time, because if you spray too much of it all at once, it can cause problems. If you spray too much in one spot, it'll start to bubble and you'll get this white foam. You'll have to cut that out later. And then you'll definitely have to prime it again. So now I am going to wait for a short while to let everything set properly, and then I will start the sanding process. Now that everything is completely sanded down, you can see that the surface is perfectly smooth and there are no dents left at all. Here you can see, look, the shade is different. You can see here how the primer has been sanded through. But if this happens on black, you can also see here the primer has been sanded through. If this happens, for example, on a trim piece on black, it's not a big deal. The main thing is that the pores haven't come through. The clear coat will cover all of this. But if, for example, this happened somewhere here, then it's better to apply primer again and only then the clear coat, because otherwise there might be a difference, a color spot will show. The shade might differ slightly, so on black it might still look perfectly fine, but on something like this, it's much better not to let that happen. That's why, especially in these specific areas, see the pores have been sanded through, you can incredibly easily sand down to the bare wood, so you really need to exercise a great deal of caution. The same goes for these spots here, so you don't accidentally sand down to the wood. Now I'm taking the exact same sandpaper, the same kind, without anything extra and carefully sanding everything down by hand. Also, you need to be very careful not to sand too much on the edge of the trim, because usually it's incredibly easy and common to sand through here as well. If there is no primer or if the application is insufficient, then later the lacquer, particularly when using polyurethane, can easily chip off when water gets in or something happens. You will start to see chips forming. So you really need to be careful in these areas. Alright, now I'm going to give it a thorough sanding and then we'll move on to the guitar itself. That's it, the neck is ready. Here's a nice even matte surface. After that, I also go over the whole surface with a Scotch-Brite pad. I do this just very lightly. If there are any tiny uneven spots where the sandpaper doesn't bend particularly well, those specific areas could easily end up being sand-throughs. Even if there are some uneven areas so they don't get scratched up, I go over them with the Scotch-Brite pad, especially these areas right here. They're uneven, but since the Scotch-Brite is soft, it gets into all those spots nicely. That's it. You can give it a rub. Now I'll blow it off to remove everything even more thoroughly. And now we move on to the guitar. So let's start with the top plate. And right away you can see these little dents. You can see them clearly. That's where the glue didn't flow through. It's especially noticeable all along the outer contour, particularly when you're carefully gluing the edges. These are the specific spots where the primer has completely sank in. And now, just like I did earlier on the neck, I'll simply fill these areas with cyanoacrylate glue. I'll let it dry thoroughly, spray it, and then sand it down smooth. The top plate is ready too. I've sanded everything. Everything I glued has sanded down nicely. Everything looks good, nothing is noticeable, everything is great. The only thing is, if you sanded through somewhere like I did here a little bit, it's not very visible now, but you can see it a bit. This often happens near the sound hole, or sometimes along the edge here, somewhere around the edges. Simply take a clean piece of cloth with some degreaser, gently rub the solution into the surface, and see if the color evens out or not. If nothing is noticeable while the degreaser is still wet, then it should be perfectly fine to proceed. You can even go ahead and lacquer it if you don't have any issues. But if the color remains uneven, then you will definitely need to prime the surface once again. However, if the wood you are working with is cedar, I really don't envy you at all, because that wood changes color quite drastically when it is exposed to primers and lacquers. And even if you apply the same primer again, the color can still end up different in that spot. Even though it's the same primer, everything's the same, but still. That's it, the top plate is ready. Now do the same with the sides. And with the back plate. In general, with this, sanding is exactly the same as with this with the neck. But the only thing is, and I didn't mention this about the neck. I didn't mention it at all. Use 320 grit sandpaper. Look, if you've sanded it like this, take a cloth, everything is clean. And always only along the grain. Everything along the grain, And keep going until you have an even matte surface. Now, well, on the top plate, it's not very noticeable. Everything here is easy to sand and clean up. There are no fibers here, so it's not like spruce or something. The only thing is, I had some pores in this piece of wood, but they disappeared. But on rosewood, especially if you haven't pre-coated it with epoxy, the pores, well, you can see how many there are, a lot of them. They will definitely be visible. Right here, I even decided to add a little bit of extra glue in a couple of spots, but overall, everything is looking fine. Now I am going to sand down every single part of this piece thoroughly and show you exactly how the finished surface should look. So I have decided to take the time to show you the final results. You see, everything is sanded, everything is even, there are no spots. But here you see it's shiny. You can see that this is still, so it needs to be sanded a bit more. But again, in these areas it's risky to sand because usually, well, except for how I paint, there can be sand throughs here. But on rosewood, overall, it's not really a big deal. It won't be visible, but just keep in mind that this area needs to be sanded down. You can't leave it like this. There's nothing here. Now I'm wiping it down with a cloth, removing everything quickly. It's even better, of course, to wipe everything down with a degreaser. Oh, by the way, now you can see them. There they are, shining. You need to sand those as well. So you wipe it down and check. It is better to set up some additional lighting in that area so you can clearly see exactly where those remaining spots are still left. But be careful not to overdo the process so you do not accidentally rub all the way through the surface. So we have already moved back home and into the new workshop. And the guitar is now completely painted. The neck is in another room. But here's the guitar. We got a great result like this. Unfortunately, I couldn't film it because I was worried that with the tripod, I'd have to get too close to the walls and there would be dust while painting. So I painted it like this. Everything turned out well. There are a couple of specks of dust somewhere here, but overall everything came out great. Here's this kind of matte polyurethane varnish, 10% gloss. Everything is perfect. And now it's very important and quite interesting to carefully examine the thickness of varnish we finally achieved. Now I'm going to take this chisel and very carefully scrape off a small bit of the varnish right here, which is something I actually need to do anyway for this part of the project. Once that is done, we will be able to measure the exact thickness of the coating. So basically, I tried my best to scrape it as precisely and as carefully as possible because I wanted to keep the underlying wood completely intact. I am just looking to remove the film itself, which you can clearly see right here. And here is the measurement for the total thickness, including the primer layer. The final result is really quite great. It is so impressive that while thicker varnish can usually be peeled off easily as a single film, here it is actually very hard to do that, and you can see that the wood fibers even get caught a bit in the process. So all in all, the final result turned out to be absolutely excellent. 0.08 millimeters. Super! That's basically it. The focus is back. It really turned out so incredibly lovely. Let me show it to you once again from the side and then from the back. It is just absolutely beautiful. Thank you all so much for watching our video today. And goodbye for now, everyone.